I'm Bernie, and I thought I would start with a quick version, which of course will take quite too much time, but of how I got to be making art, and then, well, we'll see how it goes. So I'm an installation artist, and I have a really deep interest in machines, and especially our relationship to them. You know, as a teenager, I was inspired to save us from the Sputnik menace. You know, there was this little tin ball that was beeping that the Russians had put up, and you know, it was threatening the American way of life. So I started as an engineering student at Carnegie Tech in 1963, but by my 20s, I had drifted into social psychology. And then during the student unrest in the 60s, I became totally disenchanted with any kind of academic career. And by 1970, I discovered art, and you know, I was seduced by the potential for making art. This was a piece I did as a grad student in psych in 1969. At that moment, for some reason that still defies imagination, I had this image of myself as this totally rational, clear thinking person, and above, this was before Spock from Star Trek, but it was kind of that image, really. I had this notion that I had no emotional entanglements whatsoever, no emotions, and yet I made this plasticine thing here, this little wreathing figure, and it was spilling over with emotions. Well, of course, I recognized that I must have emotions if I made this thing, and also that I was probably studying psychology because I wanted to find out about what was going on inside my own head. And psychology was not working. I was doing all these experiments and talking about all these theories, and I was getting nowhere. But making this one little sculpture, you know, revealed a lot. So I got my MA, dropped out of school, and because it was a PhD program, actually, and then been using art to answer questions ever since. So my pieces started to become mechanical in the early 80s. I wanted them to do something rather than just be something. And maybe because I started art as a psych major, my installations have always been an effort to understand how we understand the world. You know, I think we do this by building models of the world, and my pieces try to understand this understanding by making models of the models. So much of my artwork actually has been influenced by one particular character who is very present on the table here, Etienne Jules Marais, whose life work was building machines to understand movement, because for him, movement was the language of life. Marais was a 19th century physician, physiologist, inventor of medical imaging, cardiologist, aviation pioneer, and pioneer of motion pictures. And that's not even the full list. You may know his chronophotography. These images really help to change our sense of time. If you look at this, there's no past, present, and future that have equal weight. There's just a now, and the now is always shifting. So there's no way I can do justice to the effect of Marais' work on his time, and really has come down to ours. But interestingly enough, as I was doing this talk, I had this sense that Marais' Institute might have been a little bit like Pier 9. And the times he helped to shape were, I think, a lot like ours. You know, then as now, you know, the future was disrupting the conventions of our life and our work. These are a few of Marais' cameras that he invented to capture motion. And earlier than that, he was using pneumatics. And the look of his devices and the way he abstracted data from them, I don't know, for some reason, this really excited me. And, you know, especially the bird that he's got, the scaffold to allow the bird to fly freely and yet have all these pneumatic sensors hooked up to the way the bird was flying. Well, about 130 years ago, Marais was involved in motion capture, and you know, which is everywhere now. But one of Marais' goals, a very minor goal for him, was to create a guide that would help artists to represent motion more accurately. He was trying to avoid stiff, posed-looking art like this David painting. But what he got was Duchamp's nude descending a staircase, which really transformed the subject matter of art more than I think it did the techniques. Anyway, before chronophotography, Marais used a system of tambours, little drums covered with a rubber membrane. And so the slightest disturbance in one would send an air impulse down to the next one. And so a sensing unit could attach to some part of the body and send a signal to the writing unit. And I was particularly intrigued. I know I'm not talking about my work at all, but this is better stuff, really. I was particularly intrigued by his cardiac studies, So unlike the Ludwig's invasive pulse meter on the left, where he's cut open a live dog's carotid artery and stuck some mercury-filled tube, bulb down the dog's artery just to measure the pulse, Marais' pulse meter actually became a sensation when one of Napoleon III's couriers died the night after Marais diagnosed him with having an erratic heartbeat. So I first discovered Marais' work when I saw this device, which is a simple little device to measure what your lips are doing during speech. So you would put your lips on these two little curved things here, and you would be speaking, and the tube would be measuring pressure, and the motions would be transmitted to a tambour. And as luck would have it, about a year after I discovered that device, my doctor discovered I had an aortic aneurysm, and I needed to have surgery. And the diagnosis was made with an echocardiogram, which is a still here from that. And really, this is the descendant of Marais' medical imaging apparatus. So when I recovered from surgery, I felt this compulsion, of course, to make some kind of heart piece a la Marais. I started with his simulations. And a friend once suggested that all art is a self-portrait, and this became kind of a personal one for me. I call my simulation the etiology of innocence, because of the mixture of sophistication and wonder that seemed to embody Marais' work. And here it is in video. Let's see how this works. Maybe we need more volume? Thanks. So you're cranking this apparatus. Marais' original apparatus was much smaller, but I can't work that small. But since I had this rotating flywheel, I added a pulley, and I got this belt with this really long loose end that's exactly the right length. Any longer and it would get caught in the apparatus. So I wanted to have that tension, that you would be worried about this thing about to tear itself to shreds. And what it's driving, though, is this heartbeat mechanism, which if you stick your head in you'll hear the heartbeat. And this is that kind of like that privileged position you would have when you lay your head on someone's chest and you would hear their heart beating, and you might also hear their stomach gurgling. But in fact, the gurgler is really there to provide a variable back pressure for this throbbing organ that we're panning over to here. And now all this is being made happen by a person who can't see any of it happening. Someone outside is cranking this crank and causing everything to happen. So, they would always find someone else and they would try to take turns cranking. I'll crank it for you if you crank it for me, which I think is kind of perfect for a heart piece. Anyway, all the components in this etiology are very fragile. And this fragility really is the essence of my mechanical model of being human. I see us as machines, but not as ideal machines. I see us as flawed and fragile, much like the real machines that we live with, like my car, which always needs to be fixed, but somehow keeps running. And this sense of imminent failure in these things, I think, helps to make the machines seem more alive. And so in my pieces, I try to get that sense of imminent failure because people want to keep them going. They want to keep it happening. How come I don't have an elapsed time meter here? Well, anyway, seems to be working. Well, we don't know how good I am yet. I've got way more here. Anyway, our bodies break. Our ideas aren't quite right. Our relationships don't really work. The way machines fail really is a metaphor, I think, for the way we fail. And so my artworks never evolve following plans. They evolve as adjustments to broken expectations and things going wrong. And if I'm lucky, the art itself will kind of reflect this seesaw between failure and adjustment. Anyway, my Marais examinations ultimately led to this installation, which I call Conservation of Intimacy. I'm gonna have to watch it here if I can. But you see the couple on the bench are working these really oversized tambours. And one of the things that these tambours are doing is they're causing this tray to move in a room that you can't see. But this tray has these little balls on it. And you can watch the balls moving on a surveillance camera. And if you move just right with your partner, if you kind of dance around, you can get them to kind of float up into the air, at least look like they're doing that. And there's a third person who's pulling paper down, riding the bike for the chart recorder. And if the couple on the bench moves side to side, they'll blow in the ear of the person on the bike. So you get a little ménage à trois. And there are other tambours that are causing the pens to write how the couple is moving, the up, down, left, right, front, back of their motion. And even though I added this writing system kind of as a joke, really you can tell whether how the couple are getting along. If all three pens are working at the same time, you know they're kind of dancing with each other. If one pen and then the other pen, and then you know someone's in charge. It's a very different relationship. So to fully appreciate the conservation of intimacy, and really most of my art, you need to get physically involved. It's a question of participation rather than witnessing. One person can get this piece to work, but it's easier and more fun with two. And that things are better with two people is one of the points of the piece. But back to the title, which I'd never even mentioned, the conservation of intimacy. Well, Marais actually was working very heavily with the idea of conservation of energy and trying to understand the conservation of energy in terms of the dynamics and the economics of movement. So my piece jokingly extends this idea to afford an understanding of intimacy. The title is suggesting that if there are laws for the human universe, intimacy has got to be fundamental. Like energy in the physical universe, it can be reconfigured but never created or destroyed. It has to be conserved. So I think in the last 100 years, since Marais' time more or less, we have shifted from the productive body to the productive mind. And it isn't physical energy that's the field of manipulation now. I think the new economics somehow centers around desire, and hence the intimacy. Anyway, I make all these large pieces in a small shop. This is a couple of views of my shop when I was working on a piece called The Theory of Entanglement. And so I make these modules that I hope I can assemble when I actually get to the site where they're going to be shown. I had already moved the knitting machine, which was part of this theory of entanglement, up to my living room for testing and assembly. And I sometimes will also work out on the street in front of my house because, and there are lots of interesting stories surrounding that. This, by the way, is the theory of entanglement, or at least one view of it in Liverpool. So just before my residency at Autodesk, I made a small airship at Southern Exposure Gallery here. And my air proposal to Autodesk was to expand on this idea by making some air logic controls for the piece. But in my interview with Noah and Vanessa, they seem much more interested in this flowchart I happened to bring along about how to ask your boss basically for a raise. And so our conversation, and in fact they seem to be mostly interested in my talk, am I doing something here that was about being here in this place rather than any of the ideas that I came in thinking I was going to work on. And here I am, so I'm thinking, okay, well, we've thinking about the new machines we work with so much, really, computers, and how dependent we are on them, and how the software might be influencing not only how we make things, but also what we make. So I'm a fundamentally low-tech maker, wondering about our role and the computer's role in the future of making things. And since this is the home of high-tech digital fabrication, my first thought was, of course, to make a low-tech mechanical computer. And I kind of explored this a bit in 1992. I had a piece called The Archaeology of Intention, which unearthed a Stone Age digital computer on the site of the old Arts Commission gallery. The title says it all, because I never know what I'm working on until I'm done. The title, the drawings, the plans, everything happens afterwards. I always have a good rationalization for what I did, but I never have a plan for what I'm doing. So anyway, these are just some views of that piece. And I wanted to do an interior version of this piece, but in the intervening 25 years, that kind of slipped away from me. So I thought I would, I thought I'd start to rethink this. This is an early prototype, and this and some other things like this are on the table in front. This is a more successful AND logic gate. I like the linkage, but I really wanted strings and pulleys so the components could hook up over long distances. And so this is a collage, more or less random selection of images of some of my working here. But it's interesting because this system of not planning anything, but having some skills as a traditional woodworker has some conflicting results. Really, on the one hand, I can move really quickly. When I have an inspiration, it's easy for me to kind of manifest it, and I can change direction really quickly and make corrections as I work. On the other hand, I'm surprised and dismayed when things turn out to be so much more complicated than I'd ever imagined they were going to be. Anyway, so here's some of the complications. So eventually I have my logic gates. I'm ready for a distributed computing network, kind of a joke about moving all the logic gates in different parts of the building. But to test them, I needed a wall to mount them on. And this is where things got interesting, because it turns out I couldn't put any holes in any walls here. So my overall idea of the distributed computing network, well, that's not going to happen. And even to just test my components, I'm going to have to make a wall. And it needs to be not too big, and it needs to be mobile because it'll be in the way wherever it is for the next thing that's happening in that room. So I started working on the wall, and it looked a lot like an old school blackboard. So I went for the blackboard, the chalk trays and eraser. And then I got to write out my lesson. I will not put a hole in a wall on the blackboard. And the lesson morphed by the end of the blackboard thing here. But my blackboard was now so nice that I didn't want to put any holes into it either. So I shifted gears and started working on this questionnaire that Vanessa was mentioning, about our relationship to machines. So Google Forms is itself a kind of a machine, really. And by automating and digitizing the process of asking people questions, it also restricts possibilities, which I'll get to. But it does seem like a convenient way to ask people how they feel about the machines that they work with. So this was my primary question in the first questionnaire, really. And it based around this Saul Bellow quote. Probably, she was waiting to see what I would do. My real desire was to get out, but the car had already gone away over the cobbles, and having just got it underway, I couldn't check it. That's so often what it is with machinery. Be somewhat in doubt, and it carries the decision. So, does this correspond to your experience with machines? Does your hand make decisions for you as you work? What are the differences between the way the hand and the machine completes your actions? Well, although Google Forms automatically provided summary statistics, I couldn't find a way to actually get a real data analysis out of it. So I wound up doing sorts, which it will do, and then printing the data, and then manually counting out the responses in each group. So after sorting, my groups were so small that the data is really meaningless. Nevertheless, there were some results that are interesting, even though they probably are meaningless. So sorting above and below the median age, the younger group felt more in control of the machine than the older group, and yet their hand made more decisions for them. The older group was much more cynical about how the decision for the car not to stop was made. The older group also saw themselves more often as levers, and the younger group preferred rotation, speed versus mechanical advantage, I think. Yeah. But, and gears were more likely a male thing. But the most galling flaw in the questionnaire was the 5-point scale. The most frequent answer was 3. And other answers tended to cluster around that sometimes midpoint, and sometimes doesn't reveal much about how people feel about anything. So I'm tantalized but disappointed, so I go back to my mechanical computer, and the deadline for the show helped me to see that I was being too precious about it, and I made new components, mounted them right on the blackboard, and actually enjoyed putting the holes in my own wall. It was a little bit of revenge on myself. I'm not sure how that works. But I was kind of disappointed in the handles here. And, this is a little mechanical digital computer. It's got 2 AND gates, one AND here, another there. An AND gate needs 2 inputs to get an output. The outputs occur here at the OR. Now this AND gate has 1 input already working. So if I pull this handle, if you look at the OR, you'll see it gets an output. This AND gate has neither of the inputs primed, so if I pull this, you don't get much happening at the OR. However, if I pull the inverter, which is the knot right here, if you watch this block, this input block, and that input block, watch them switch. So now this AND gate is primed, and that one isn't. So when I pull this handle, I get an output. But if I come over here and pull this handle, I don't. This is your basic digital computer. It's a little sticky. Hold on. And let's watch this guy slowly come up. So yeah, a little sticky. Anyway, I gave myself an incomplete for this. That's why the title is an incomplete, because I wasn't happy with those input devices having these handles, these colored handles. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to use one of these fabulously comfy stools that we have here as a way to input information into the computer. And so I made this stool that, this is the final. I've got another one right here with the top on it. And it was a very cool mechanism, but incredibly unstable. And the shop staff had a really good time with it. They were thrilled. This was something they could play with ad infinitum. But I was really depressed because it was just not going to be controllable. So as I'm leaving the wood shop, I'm talking to Andrew, one of the other artists, by the water jet, I told him that my stool was too unpredictable. You couldn't control it because it has no midpoint. And as I said those words, it struck me that the stool was the answer to my questionnaire problem, even though it was a complete failure for the computer. So this is a little collage of my traditionally making gears and various things that were necessary to activate this guy. And so I asked people to sit on the stool, lean right if they thought they were in control, and left if they thought the machine was. And with this particular stool, which you're welcome to try out at your own risk later, only the extremes provide stability, and then you fall off. So it seems like there's a political metaphor in this too, that this is the times we live in. Unintentional, but anyway, here's the
70s disco.
I have been.
Thought I had.
It's really hard.
That is.
That's the think about, you want to lean left or right?
I'm just on the line.
So the Republicans were ahead on the first day. The second day, it was pretty neck and neck. But last night, as I was working on this talk, it occurred to me just how essential my bad planning and the peers' restrictions have been to this final piece. You know, could this piece have been designed and executed using CAD/CAM systems? Absolutely. It's actually a very simple machine. But I would never have thought to do it. If I had successfully planned something, the design might have produced a better art piece, but not this particular piece. This one I needed to stumble through a bunch of failures to get this to happen. And this dance I do around failure isn't nearly as much fun as I've been making it sound. Do you guys know Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks? Dan Hicks died recently. Dan Hicks had this thing, you know, he has all these really hilarious songs like "Where's the Money If You Never Give Me Anything Else" and things like that. And anyway, at one point, you know, everyone's laughing and applauding in between numbers, and he gets up and he says, you know, it's not easy being up here. You know, it's not easy. You know, this is really hard. Thank you. You know. So anyway, this is that part. This is that part of this. This is my Dan Hicks impersonation. But anyway, so it only seems to me that this failure dance works if I'm actually plagued with anxiety, anger, depression, doubt, and being in this struggle is also when I feel most alive. And it occurred to me at like 4 a.m. that this has all the hallmarks of addiction. So anyway, there's with that final thought, I want to. There's a lot more to see at my website. I've got a 42-step instructable, no 12-step program for me, and I have a hard time finding my instructable, by the way, but maybe you'll have better luck. But I want to say thanks to everyone here. You know, really, I mean, it's hard to single out anyone in particular, but Vanessa and Noah, the shop staff, all my fellow heirs, everyone I talked to, and, you know, Paolo, Jacob, Jonathan. I mean, there are all sorts of people who just, you know, these conversations just were amazing. I don't know how they influenced what I was doing, but they were there somewhere. And also a special thanks to Rick for not allowing me to put any holes in any walls. And I just want to leave you with one last thought. Yes, I know that, Sydney. Everybody knows that. But look, 4 wrongs squared minus 2 wrongs to the 4th power divided by this formula do make a right. And anyway, I'm still looking for that formula. And thank you all.